Hello, welcome back. Today we are going to be working on completing the square. This is a technique to solve quadratic equations. And just so you know, completing the square is a technique where you can solve all quadratic equations. Before you learned how to solve by factoring, but some quadratic equations can't be factored. This is something that works for all quadratic equations. You can always use that, whether or not it can be factored, okay? So, but before we learn about completing the square, we're going to do some build-up of solving some equations, okay? So let's say I had x squared equals 4. Now I could subtract 4 from both sides, which would be difference of two squares, and then factor it, and I'd get x equals 2, x equals negative 2. But in this case, I'm going to do something a little bit quicker, a little bit more intuitive. If something squared equals 4, obviously that something is 2, right? How do I show that? Well, I have square root. Okay, the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 4 is 2. But wait, there's two possible answers. Can you think of the other one? It's positive or negative 2. Okay, so x equals 2 or x equals negative 2. Alrighty. Now, if we had something that looked like m squared equals 11, we just do the same thing. We get rid of the squared by square rooting both sides. So m equals positive or negative square root of 11. Which is kind of weird, but that is the right answer. Okay? Square root of 11 or negative square root of 11. Now, depending on what type of answer you want, sometimes you may want to turn this into a decimal approximation. It will not repeat because it's an irrational number, but you could also turn this into a decimal approximation, 3 point something or other, whatever, and negative 3 point something or other. You can ask your calculator. Okay? So we want to square root something to get rid of the squared, the variable squared, okay? Now, in another way, if we had something like v minus 5 squared equals 9, again, we square root both sides, so it's v minus 5 equals the square root of 9, in this case, positive or negative 3. So either v minus 5 is 3 or v minus 5 is negative 3. Okay, so v equals 8 or v equals 2 in this case. Okay. And in the same way, if we had something like p plus 3 quantity squared equals 13, you could square root both sides. P plus 3 equals positive or negative 13. And p equals negative 13 plus or minus the square root, p equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 13. So, this is the answer. You could write it as two separate terms. And I didn't do that correctly. Let me fix that real quickly. So it could either be p negative 3 plus square root 13 or negative 3 minus square root 13. Two different answers, okay? This is fine, or this is fine, depending on how your teacher wants you to show it. I actually don't care. Either way is fine. Alrighty, so that's all nice and well if we have something squared, okay? But sometimes we don't have something squared, and yet we can still use this technique to solve it, okay? So let's take a look at that. If we have p plus 3 quantity squared equals 13, right? Well, let's do a different one. Let's say I have c squared minus 8c plus 3 equals 0. Okay? Now, this looks more like what you've been doing. You would factor this and set each factor equal to 0, right? But if you try to factor this, you're not going to be able to do it. It's not factorable. We wish there was a squared here. Oh, look, there is. But then there's this other linear term. So what we have to do is we have to get a trinomial where I can factor this. Okay? And I'm going to show you how to do it. Okay. First, you actually solve for the constant. You get the constant out of the way on the other side. C squared minus 8c equals negative 3. Okay? Now, watch what I do here. I'm going to, what I want here is something that's going to make this a perfect square, okay? So I take b. b is negative 8. But I take half of b, and then I square it. So negative 8 over 2 squared, okay? Negative 8 over 2 in this case is negative 4. Negative 4 squared, negative 4 times negative 4 is 16, okay? So, first you solve for the constant. Sorry, I got a little bit of a cold here. And then 2, you add the quantity b over 2 squared to both sides. Okay? Now look what happens when I do that. Okay? If I add 16 to both sides, okay? I'm going to erase this. Okay? I'm going to erase this bit so you can see. Now, when I do that, when I add the 16 to both sides, okay, I get c squared minus 8c plus 16. On this side, I have 13. Fine. On this side, I can now factor it, okay, and you can see that it's a negative 4 and a negative 4. So I have c minus 4 times c minus 4. See it? Now that's exactly what I want, because that's another way to write this. The lazy way to write this is c minus 4 squared. See it? So we factor this. Okay, add b over 2 quantity squared to both sides, and then step 3, factor, and then square root both sides. Right, and then solve. Okay, so in this case, we're just going to solve it just like we solved the previous ones, right? Square root both sides. It's still in blue. Let's go back in black. C minus 4 is plus or minus square root 13. We have c equals 4 plus or minus the square root 13. Remember, that's two different answers. 4 plus square root 13 and 4 minus square root 13. Okay, so this is completing the square. So we're going to practice just the act of completing the square, and then we'll do a whole problem together, okay? So if we had, I don't know, let's go with m squared plus 10m plus, okay. So again, what do? We add the quantity b over 2 quantity squared. That's what we want to do. What do we have to add here? What do we have to add here? Half of this squared. What's half of this? And then square that. So b over 2 squared is 10 over 2 squared. This is 5. 5 squared is 25. See it? Let's try another one. What if we had t squared minus 18t? We're going to add b over 2 quantity squared. What do we have to add here? Half of this and then square. So it's negative 18 over 2 quantity squared. So it's negative 9 squared. Now notice it's negative 9 times negative 9, so it's positive 81. See it? Okay, so let's try a few. So, I'm going to give you a problem, and you are going to try to solve it using completing the square, okay? So, go ahead and try to solve this with completing the square. Pause the video, and I'll put all the answers up, and you can check your work, okay? Go ahead and pause it now. Alrighty, folks, so check your work here. We solve for the constant. Half of 10 is 5. 5 squared is 25. Add that to both sides. Excuse me. We factor that. r plus 5 quantity squared is 27. Square root both sides. So negative 5 plus or minus square root 27. Alrighty, now, for math studies, that's probably fine. We also can simplify the square root 27 to be 3 square root 3. If you don't know how to do that step, that's fine. We can address that later. Okay? Let's try one more and then call it a day. Alright? Here we go. P squared minus 3 equals 16p. Okay, so you're going to solve this with completing the square. Now remember my hint, think about the first step. Think about the first step. You want to solve for the constant. So you want to get the constant, the thing without the variable, by itself, okay? So go ahead and give this a shot. Pause the video now. Alrighty folks, go ahead and take a look at this. Check your work. Alrighty, so now you know how to solve quadratics by completing the square. Hope that you learned a thing or two. We'll see you next time. Toodles.